Ladies and gentlemen, and good evening to those who have logged in from India, Singapore, Japan, and Europe. And good morning to those who have joined us from the US. My name is Shivam Srivastava, and currently I'm a researcher at Mizuho India Japan Study Center at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. We are delighted to welcome all of you to the panel discussion on the webinar format hosted by Mizuho India Japan Studies Centers and Center for Software and Information Technology Management, CSTIMs, which is titled as Promises and Perils of AI, Mitigating Bias, Exploring Opportunities, and Achieving Fairness. This panel discussion aims to promote application and dissemination of knowledge for the benefit of academics and professionals from all walk of life. Our panelists, who are experts in the respective fields, will promote valuable insights and high quality information in the area of management, technology, society, and culture. Before going straight into the discussion, let me give you a brief introduction about MIJC and CSITM. Mizuho India Japan Studies Center was set up as a center for excellence at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, to serve as a facilitator for many collaborative initiatives among academia, industry, and the government agencies between India and Japan on various areas of mutual interest. These would include domains such as business environment, government policies, innovation, project management, sourcing, technology transfer, development and management, sustainability, intellectual property right, and understanding of local culture and business practices. Center for Software and Information Technology Management, CSTIM, is also IIMB's Center of Excellence on Digital Technology Management. It fosters close link with the IT sector in India, especially with the technology hub. It is also connected globally with the management researchers from the top universities, practitioners from global tech companies and startups, and reputed policymakers of India. Now, it is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce the esteemed speakers who have joined us for this exciting session. Our first speaker is Professor Sharath Chandraguntu. Dr. Sharath Chandraguntu is an assistant professor at the Department of Computer and Information Science at the University of Pennsylvania and a senior fellow at the Leonard Davis Institute of Health Economics. His research focuses on building predictive models using user generated data for an uncovering insights into health outcomes and psychological states of individual and communities. This research aims to supplement clinical diagnosis and facilitate early and personalized intervention for improving treatments and well-being. His research has raised over US 4.5 million from the National Institute of Health, Penn Global, the World Bank Group, and the other agencies. His work has been covered by the Times of India, American Psychological Association, Wired, Canadian Broadcasting Company, The Atlantic, US News, and other venues. Our second panelist is Dr. Nikhil Malik. Dr. Nikhil Malik is an assistant professor of marketing at the Marshall School of Business, University of Southern California. Dr. Nikhil studies the economic implications of machine learning and other disruptive technologies. His research work touches on Zillow's ML-based pricing for homes and Bitcoin's pricing for payments. His research highlights issues of pricing adoption bias and fairness. Dr. Nikhil's research has been supported in the past by PNC Bank, Ripple, and Henry J. Galliot Presidential Fellowship. He serves on the editorial review board of Marketing Science and received the Distinguished Service Award for peer review work at Management Science. Dr. Nikhil received his PhD and master's from Carnegie Mellon University and his bachelor's degree from IIT Delhi. He also spent time in designing big data technology for Goldman Sachs. Given this background, Nikhil brings expertise at the intersection of AI and marketing. We are also joined by Dr. Jaideep Srivastava, who have agreed to take up the questions under Q&A session. Dr. Jaideep Srivastava is a professor of computer science at the University of Minnesota. He joined the Department of Computer Science and Engineering in 1988. He currently serves as the Data Science Director of Undergraduate Studies. Dr. Srivastava is the co-founder and president of Ninja Metrics Inc., a startup company that focuses on analytics of social system and social media. He spends 3 years at Qatar Computing Research Institute, a flagship institute of Qatar Foundation, as a research director and chief scientist. Additionally, he has spent significant time in the industry, including stints as the chief technology officer for Persistent Systems, the director of data analytics for Yodlee Inc., and the data mining architect for Amazon. He has received his bachelor's degree from Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, in India, and he has done his master's and PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. Unfortunately, our fourth panelist, Dr. Vishal Mishra, is unable to join us today as webinar due to sudden escalation of unforeseen circumstances at Columbia University. The panel would be moderated by the Chief Operating Officer of MIJSC, Mr. Saidi Pratnam. Mr. Saidi Pratnam has been heading this MIJSC center since 2020. He is an alumnus of Indian Institute of Science, which is known as IISc, Bangalore, and also IIM Bangalore. He has done his PhD in the field of lean manufacturing from University of Twente, Netherlands. He has over 50 years of experience in the industry and the academic field. He has worked in aeronautics and auto industries, both in India and abroad, retiring as the president of large auto component company in India. In the academic field, he has worked as the dean of Anand University, which is a corporate university responsible for leadership and operational transformation. He also takes executive development programs at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. Mr. Saidi Pratnam has also written a book which is named as Creating Next Generation Manufacturing Change Leaders, documenting the unique approach for creating industry-ready engineers trained in the new manufacturing paradigm of follow-oriented manufacturing. So I would like to welcome all of you into this forum, and I would like to set the structure for today's discussion. Each panelist would present his perspective for about 12-13 minutes. This would be followed by a discussion that would be moderated by Mr. Saidi Pratna. The panel have agreed to take up the questions from the audience at the end. So do type in your question as and when they occur to you. The sequence of today's presentation would be Dr. Sharat Chandra and Professor Nikhil Malik. So without any further ado, it is my great pleasure to invite Dr. Sharat to share his invaluable insights and expertise with us. Over to you, Dr. Sharat.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction and setting the stage, Shivam. And thanks so much for having me here. Just confirming that you're able to hear me and you're able to see the screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, super. So let me get started. So I'm a faculty member at the School of Computer Science, the Department of Computer Science at UPenn. And I would like to talk about some of the work we've been doing in the space of mental health and how AI can be used to gain more insights. So before I begin, I'd like to take a poll of folks who are attending online. So you can either go to this link bit.ly/imb_lonely, or just scan the QR with your phones, and you'll see one question. It basically asks, do you feel lonely or alone more than once a week? And I'd encourage you to submit your responses whenever, right? So again, just to define loneliness and alone, it does not mean that you're physically alone or aloof. You can be in a sea of people and still be alone, right? So, and still feel alone. So the question is asking more about the latter, where you're feeling alone, irrespective of how many people you're with. Okay, I'll go on. Oops, that's, let me zoom in again. Okay, so that's the question. And now a lot of us have heard this growing up. Is mental health real, right? So for instance, we've heard different versions of statements like, oh, just get over it. It's all in your head. There are so many side effects of taking medicines. Just go out and do some exercise and you'll be fine, and things like that. But often mental health goes above and beyond these kinds of generalized statements, right? And we are seeing time and again that mental health has real consequences, and especially in India, even in very elite institutions, we are seeing students sort of having suicidal ideation. And there are some stats from 2017 which suggests almost 36 students attempt suicide per day, which is basically staggering, right? For a country where you have such a population and students are sort of one of the highest, I think, population percentages, these numbers are really bothersome. Not just in India, loneliness actually is a public health threat throughout the world. Some studies suggest almost 1 in 2 young adults, that is 50% of young adults, feel alone. And if you look at the elderly population, the number sort of increased to 33%. But how do you sort of define loneliness? Loneliness is sort of an emotional inconvenience or emotional response when your expectation for what interpersonal relationships should be is not matched by our actual interpersonal relationships, right? Like I said before, you don't have to be physically alone in a mountain somewhere. You can be in a city like Mumbai or Bangalore or Hyderabad with a bunch of people in the same house and still feel lonely. But why do we care about loneliness, right? So is it really that important? Several studies, again, have suggested that feeling lonely consistently sort of elevates your risk for depression, dementia, insomnia. And what is sort of interesting is the risk for cardiovascular disease and stroke also go up by almost 30%, right? So it directly affects physical health. And some studies have suggested that this is as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, right? So it's really, really bad for one's health overall. And yet it sort of receives little to no attention in the healthcare setting, right? So for instance, when we go to the doctor, nobody asks us any instruments to sort of measure how we're feeling mentally. So what can we do about this, right? So number one, we would want to first be able to measure. And as an engineer, if I'm not able to measure something, I can't move the needle up or down on that outcome, right? And number two, once we have a measurement, then we can potentially validate that measurement and develop interventions to improve those outcomes. And this is where AI sort of comes in, right? So I'll try and discuss two questions. One, could AI be used to measure and obtain insights into loneliness? And two, what are some potential challenges to overcome along the way? So let's get started with the first one. So this is again, I guess, I don't have a poll here, but you can just answer it in your heads. How much time do you think we spend on social media? And this sort of shows already that folks who are younger than 25 have sort of hit the jackpot. It's almost as much as 3 hours a day. And what is interesting is folks who are elderly as well spend a significant amount of time on social media. And if you compare and contrast that to the amount of time you spend with your doctor, it might be what? Twice a year, thrice a year at max, right? So you're sort of spending all this time online. And the idea is, can AI be used to pick signals from all the time you're spending online to better inform the healthcare setting? So this is a study that we published in British Medical Journal, looking at Twitter and studying expressions of loneliness, where we started with very simple idea. Can we look at just people going online and declaring that I'm feeling alone or lonely, right? And we found just in Pennsylvania about 76,000 users on Twitter who are going online and saying that I'm lonely or I'm alone. And a lot of them, of course, are sort of song lyrics, spam ads, and so on. So we removed those, and we found about 6,000 users who had sufficient number of posts in their timelines. And we see that it's predominantly young population, and it skews towards women. And then we downloaded their timeline of tweets using the Twitter API, discarded retweets, and we also matched them with a control group of users based on the same age, gender, and period of posting, because we want to control for these covariates. Otherwise, you could be potentially picking up on differences that are because of age and gender. So this is our natural language processing pipeline. We collect the data, we tokenize the data, and we generate a few language features, and we create what are known as topics. So topics are essentially clusters of co-occurring words. Here's an example topic. And then we try and correlate these language features with the outcomes. Here, in our case, it's the lonely group and the not lonely group. And we also see how well language can predict or classify these two groups. So starting with what is the language of loneliness on social media, right? So these are all words and phrases that are significantly associated with the lonely group after controlling for age and gender. And the biggest signal that you see is a lot of self-referential talk, right? So I, me, myself, I need, in my feelings, I'm not, right? So this is one of the biggest drivers or predictors of loneliness. Whenever there is increased talk about oneself, that potentially indicates a risk towards being alone. And the second piece that you want to see is issues with relationships, understandably, right? And the third is a lot of swearing, a lot of negative language overall, right? And this is the control set of users, right? So people who are not lonely. Again, the most significant feature you see is user. So if anybody used Twitter, you can essentially tag individuals and then respond to tweets at them, right? So what we did in our language processing pipeline, we basically masked all those username mentions with just one user token. That way we can account for these conversations that are happening. And that is the single most predictive feature of the control group. And you also see a lot of chatter about, for instance, going to the game with family, with friends, and also celebrating birthdays, and a lot of positive language in general. So how well can language alone predict expressions of loneliness, right? So here we have two sets of groups, 6,000 individuals in the lonely group, 6,000 individuals in the control group. And language alone can do about 75 to maybe 80%, right? Of the times it can get if somebody is lonely, just looking at their social media language, mind you, right? So is this really great, as in, can this be used as a diagnostic? No, right? So just by looking at somebody's language on social media, you cannot diagnose if they're lonely or not. But at the same time, it gives you a really good risk assessment measure so that you can have follow-up, which are more detailed and in person potentially. So that's one set of studies that we've done at the individual level. But the interesting feature is once you have these language models that are trained to predict loneliness at the individual level, you can then scale them to communities. For instance, during COVID, we've been collecting about 5 million tweets every day and geotagged them to counties in the US, districts in India, and boroughs in the UK. And we have this data for about a decade. So I think we have something like 4 billion tweets or so sitting on our servers. What we did is we basically applied these machine learning models to tweets that are being generated on a daily basis. And what did we see? We sort of saw during 2020, the orange line, the vertical line is basically around the time that the national emergency was declared in the US. And the green line are loneliness estimates from Twitter for 2019. And the orange line are the Twitter estimates for 2020. And you sort of see almost 2 standard deviations elevation in loneliness expressions right after COVID sort of hit, right? Why is this important? If you had to do or get a sense of how your communities are feeling, you'd have to roll out surveys and you'd have to ask them a bunch of questions, right? This is number one, costly. And number two, there's always a time lag, right? You roll out surveys today, you get responses maybe in a week. So you're not really looking at how the communities are feeling today, but you're essentially seeing how the community was feeling last week or last month, right? Whereas social media or language on social media sort of offers a real-time pulse of how the community is feeling. So that was one piece of the agenda where, I think I sort of tried to convince you that AI can be used to measure and obtain insights into mental health. But what are some potential challenges, right? So is AI perfect? Number one, no. We've seen that the prediction accuracies are not great. At the same time, it's a reasonable measure of risk to some extent. But at the same time, there are other pieces here, right? For instance, and this was one fact that sort of blew my mind, right? In 2021 alone, digital startups secured over $5 billion in venture capital, right? So it is more than double that of any other medical issue. So mental health is clearly a priority, and a lot of folks have recognized that digital is the way to go as more individuals work more with their phones and prefer to talk to real human beings less. How best to sort of connect people to the help they need. This is something that a lot of folks are already thinking in the US and in India. So the first note of caution is that a lot of studies have basically focused on the US, UK, Canada. So what psychologists typically call as weird countries, right? So Western, educated, industrial, rich, democratic contexts, right? So when you build models, when you're training data, is all coming from the so-called weird countries, these insights may or may not map to other places, right? So for instance, this is some work that's being led by my students where we saw how, for instance, can we do the same thing in China using Sina Weibo? And we were able to get stressors, the psychological stressors, how they vary between urban and rural areas. And it was interestingly very different from the US, right? And this is the ongoing work by another student, Kushi, where we were looking at Reddit data from India, where the treatment gap is almost 95%, right? So of 100 people who report mental health issues, maybe only 5 people are getting any treatment, right? Why? Several reasons, stigma, taboo, lack of mental health professionals, whatnot, but these are the stats, right? So we went into Reddit and we pulled people, individuals who post on mental health subreddits. For folks who are not familiar with Reddit, it's basically another social media platform with several sub-communities where individuals can post anonymously, right? So when there is anonymity, you get a lot more authentic sort of expressions. And then we created 4 sets of groups. One is folks in India who are posting in mental health subreddits, folks outside India who are posting in mental health subreddits. And then we had controls where folks in and outside India were not posting in mental health subreddits, right? Now you can sort of look at various kinds of analyses, sort of comparing and contrasting how people talk about mental health in India. And this is just a glimpse of what we are finding. For instance, in India, a lot of mental health concerns are academic and work related. And a lot of relationship struggles are with living family members, right? So family members are alive and people are talking about relationship issues. In contrast, outside India, a lot of chatter or a lot of discourse on mental health is about depression medications, SSRIs, and so on. And there is family and grief, but it's often about dead family members, right? People passed away, and then you're sort of grieving. And there's also a lot of discussion around coping and seeking help, which we didn't find as much in the Indian context. So the second note of caution, even within a country, for instance, all individuals are not the same, right? So there are cultural differences within country, if you will, and this is what we're calling heterogeneity. And there's some work from my postdoc where we looked at basically the dimensions of self-referential language. And if you see the graph here, as depression increases, the level of self-referential language also increases. This is very similar to what we saw in the word cloud. People who are lonely were talking a lot about I, me, myself, I need, I can't, I don't, right? But at the same time, if you divide this into Black Americans and white Americans, the blue line here is the white Americans and the orange line here is the Black Americans. You sort of see that this finding holds well for white Americans, but it doesn't for Black Americans, right? So there's something going on that sort of suggests that either A, Black Americans use social media differently, or self-disclose their mental health differently on social media, right? We also had another follow-up study where we tried to see if machine learning models could predict depression among these two populations, and we found that they could not for Black Americans, but they were doing a really good job at predicting depression for white Americans, right? So when you build AI models on quote unquote majority class, it may not generalize for other groups of individuals in the same population. The third note of caution. So this is some work from my colleagues at Stanford, where with the boom of large language models, we were trying to think of how to integrate these into mental health care. And increasingly, as we move towards fully autonomous AI, where you don't really have human in the loop, and a lot of companies are looking to move there, even though I have a lot of skepticism towards that. There are increasing challenges of privacy and security. For instance, any sort of data breach could affect people's personal lives immensely. And as you sort of move to higher stages of fully autonomous AI, here you're sort of missing that human connection, right? Which sort of makes medicine what it is, which is that doctor, clinician, and patient relationship, which sort of could be compromised, right? So the third note of caution is to account for or put in the forefront the human aspect of mental health care, and also to sort of prioritize privacy and informed consent, if you will. So I'll try and be brief. I think Saideep and Shubham, I've stuck to the time there. So these are the two big takeaways that I would want you to have. One, digital data and AI is a great low-cost resource to measure mental health in real time, right? So just by looking at somebody's words, you're able to get a reasonable risk assessment of how individuals are doing and also how communities are doing. And number two, heterogeneity is real. When you train AI models, you'd want to account for differences, cultural variation across groups and even within individuals. And thirdly, if somebody says that they're feeling alone and are lonely, perhaps they really are, without being dismissive, we should be there for them to be supportive. So let's look at how we did on this poll. I don't know if folks have had the time to respond. If not, you can always scan this and go in. So it looks like either my poll is not working or, oh, I need to click result. This is interesting. So it's almost a 50-50 split. Of 31 people who responded, about 16 said they're not feeling lonely, and about 15 said they are feeling lonely. And I did the same exercise among college students when I was giving a talk in one of the universities in India, and the split was almost 70% yes and 30% no, right? So that sort of talks to the heterogeneity again. But also here, 50% of the individuals saying yes is a significant number. And that's, again, sort of goes back to my point of how we could potentially tap into AI and technology to, number one, get better insights, and number two, to bridge the mental health care gap. And these are the collaborators, mostly psychologists and clinicians who made this work possible. And that's my funding disclosures, and that's my team. And if that's my email, if you have any questions, I'm happy to take up after this session, if not in this session. Thanks again.
I think that's a wonderful context setting. Thank you. Truly appreciate. And gives us an overview, and also both the challenges which you have said with the cautionary notes that you have mentioned, as well as on the positive side, whatever you have explained. I think that's a very insightful to us. We will come back to a deeper discussion on some of those points that you have mentioned. I think Professor Nikhil is now ready to share his perspective.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sharath. Let me share my screen. All right. I hope all of you can see my screen.
Yes.
So thanks a lot for getting us started on mental health and loneliness. Probably going to have to be switching gears a little bit as I talk a little bit more about maybe the financial markets and the housing markets. But I'll try to keep it close to the theme of the day on promises and perils of AI. So first of all, nice to have the opportunity to talk about this topic. I'm Nikhil. I'm Assistant Professor of Marketing at Marshall School of Business at USC. It's early morning here in Los Angeles. I'll try to keep it hopefully short, within 10 or 12 minutes of time. So just a bit of background on where I'm coming from. I'm someone who works at the intersection of AI, technologies, and economics. So everything that I look at from the point of view of firm profits and consumer surplus. So ultimately, firms or platforms that are in control of designing a lot of these AI algorithms aren't designing them necessarily to improve their accuracy, but designing them in incentives for their own profits. And so I look at that aspect to say, what kind of choices would they make when they design these AI algorithms, and does it therefore lead to promise or peril for the consumers that might consume these AI predictions? In my work, I typically use both statistical theory on the AI side, as well as game theory, which is a field to kind of look at strategic choices of consumers and firms in a marketplace. So let me start very broad and try to narrow down to one specific context that I want to talk about today. So broadly speaking, I look at in my field, me and a few other researchers, we look at two-sided platforms, which essentially intermediate between buyers and sellers. So think of Uber, intermediates between riders and drivers. Amazon intermediates between buyers and a bunch of sellers. Airbnb is a short-term rental, which intermediates between visitors, travelers, and homeowners who might want to be short-term renters. We're pretty accustomed to these kind of two-sided platforms. So what's unique is there are a lot of these two-sided platforms in the US housing market. And today I'm going to talk about one of those examples, which is Zillow.com. But there are other such platforms in the US housing market like Redfin and Open Doors. There are also a lot of these platforms that exist in India, like housing.com, magicbricks.com, 99acres.com. The business model for some of these platforms is slightly different across countries. There are also a lot of similarities. So I'm going to talk about Zillow as one of these example of one of these platforms today, and maybe we'll see at the end if we can generalize what I'm talking about more broadly to these other platforms, these other countries, and the markets overall. So talking specifically about Zillow, I'll point out two very unique ways in which Zillow, the platform, uses AI in the housing market. So one popular application of AI that Zillow has is something called a Zestimate, which is an AI-based estimate of the current value of a home. And this Zestimate is available for absolutely almost all homes in the United States. It's externally visible. So if you are a homeowner or you are a home buyer, you can look up any home. You may be visiting a friend for a Saturday evening dinner. You're curious about their home. You can pull up their address. You can see the value of their home based on this AI model. And Zillow publishes broadly about its AI model as well. A lot of people have distrust about it. Nevertheless, it does influence a lot in how people think of pricing homes in the market. Second interesting application of AI that Zillow offered, and I would say the past here because this didn't work out quite well for the Zillow business, is an AI-based estimate of the future value of the home. This is, to all of us, current value is interesting, but what's really important is the future value. What would this home be worth in 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years down the line? This AI algorithm was proprietary or internal to Zillow, and Zillow did not publish any details about this. Essentially, Zillow was using this AI algorithm to buy, upgrade, and sell homes, to essentially flip homes. So just think about the size, just to set the context. Think about the incredible size of influence these AI applications have in the market. So the US housing market is $47 trillion. That's the total value of homes in the US. Any given year, more than $1 trillion worth of homes are bought and sold in the US. At its peak, Zillow offers, which is one of the applications of AI that Zillow was applying. In 2021, Zillow offers was buying 1% of all US homes. Now, 1%, the number itself might seem small, but imagine a single company that's responsible for buying 1% of all homes that are bought or sold in a country. In specific counties or cities in the US, this number was as high as 5, 6, or 7%. So imagine 6% of all homes in the city bought by a single platform or a company. And this was all based on AI predictions behind the scenes. Now, for the 99% of the homes that were not bought by Zillow, they still are greatly influenced by Zillow's estimate. Zillow's estimate is current estimate of the value of a home. So even if Zillow is not part of a transaction to buy or sell a home, its estimate of the home value is still significantly influencing the sale price of a home. That's a huge influence on the market. Now, just take a step back. Now, these are a couple of applications of AI that this one platform, these popular applications are quite well known in the market. But fundamentally, if you think about it, AI can add a lot of value in the housing market, be it US or be it anywhere else. Because fundamentally, it can cut down on costs incurred in search and pricing for homes. So here are a few quotes and conclusions from various studies out there. It's been estimated that current homeowners tend to misprice their home by anywhere between 5 to 16%. So if you ask them what the value of their home is today, and then you look back a year later what their home actually sells for, they're often wrong by 5 to 16%. A typical home buyer, now on the buyer side, tours about 15 homes, makes offers on about 10 homes, and cumulative they spend about $845 million of work time in search and pricing for homes. In any country, as far as I know, buying home takes anywhere between 2 to 6 months or even a year to get everything sorted. 85% of first-time buyers find this challenging, and in all this process, real estate agents charge anywhere between 2 to 7% commission on home sales. So it's clear that searching for homes and being able to price for homes is challenging, and AI does have a promise in cutting down these costs significantly. So when you think about search, think about Amazon recommendations or recommendation on Netflix or recommendations on music. Essentially, AI can significantly narrow down your search space by suggesting or recommending things that are very specific to your interests. So that's one clear application which can cut down the search cost for the consumer. Second one is pricing. Think about the mental burden of having to negotiate prices for a cab ride, which maybe takes 5 minutes, but think about the mental burden of negotiating prices with the homeowner that takes days, weeks, and months. And as whether we like it or not, we feel like Uber sometimes prices rides too much or too little. It does completely cut down the time that one will spend negotiating prices for a ride. Similarly, in the case of housing market, there is a fundamental promise that having AI as this neutral arbiter of prices, it could cut down the time that we spend bargaining, negotiating prices in the housing market, which leads to such a big loss in consumer surplus. So this is the promise of AI. Fundamentally, these platforms have a role to play in solving this problem, but there are significant issues with application of AI in this market as well. So there are two of these that I'm going to talk about today. One that I'm going to call this idea of a feedback loop. And the second one is going to be looking at the platform's profit incentives, the platform that's offering the AI, what are its profit incentives. So these are these 2 points come from two different streams of projects that I am very actively working on. There are also other projects that I work on which go into algorithmic aversion, trust, transference. I'm not going to talk that much about the third bullet today. So just to, for the first bit, so the first point that I want to highlight is this idea of a feedback loop. And it's not something that's specific to the housing market. The simple idea that any AI machine learning model makes predictions about prices, in this case, those predictions are consumed by humans on the other end, right? So in the housing market, these humans are buyers and sellers in the market. So they consume these predictions about what is this home worth. They act on these predictions, and the buyer and the seller might negotiate, bargain after receiving these predictions. They might interact with each other, and that will lead to some realized sale prices in the market. A home sale price will be realized. The interesting bit is those same home sale prices will become training data for the machine learning model in the next period. Right? So this is what makes this environment interesting to study, because in a way the AI's prediction is confounding its own training data for future. So whatever I predict, if the humans follow my prediction to some extent, I have a self-fulfilling prophecy about my predictions. And this is this idea of feedback loop is in fact a lot more common with recommender systems. Think about YouTube recommendations, how whatever videos YouTube recommends, people tend to watch those similar videos. And as YouTube's algorithm looks at historical viewing behavior, it's whatever it prophesizes sort of comes true in those past viewing behavior. So this is a problem that's been more well known in the context of recommender systems, also under the topic of filter bubbles. But we are sort of trying to look at the same problem in the context of housing market, given the size of this market and the emergence of platforms that are offering similar AI in the housing market. I will not go into the details of the actual paper and how do we go about modeling all of this. Please do look up the paper and love to have feedback and thoughts about that offline. But in one line, let me try to conclude what we are trying to claim. We are trying to claim that because of the feedback loop, the inherent feedback loop that's present with AI predictions in the housing market, the home prices will become more erratic, both in positive and negative directions over a long run. So that's sort of the big picture claim that we're trying to make about housing market prices. Let me come back to this in a moment. Let me talk about the second point as well, about platforms' profit incentives. Now, in the first problem, I sort of didn't incorporate any incentives for the platform or the firm to design the algorithm in a certain way. The algorithm was just creating these erratic prices just because it was confounding its training data. In the second problem, we look at the platform's incentive. So if you think about how this problem is set up, you have platform on one end, which is Zillow, which is in control of the machine learning model. That platform's choice of the model then creates these prices, which might have some fluctuations. The home seller observes these estimates of their home value. By observing these estimates, the home seller might decide, should I enter the market to sell my home, and what price should I set for my home? Right? So their decision to enter the market and how to price their home depends on the prices that they are seeing, the algorithmic prices they are seeing from the platform. And in this work, we look at the platform's incentive to set these AI algorithms to maximize advertising revenue instead of statistical accuracy. Right? So when you think of algorithms, we just tend to think the objective is to maximize some sort of an accuracy of that AI prediction. But that's typically not the case. Typically in large firms, platforms, whether it's Amazon or it's Google, it's Uber or Zillow in my case, are often looking at signals of advertising revenue to figure out how to adjust and tweak their algorithms. And we try to say that, yes, to some extent, these revenue objectives are somewhat in line with accuracy objectives up until a certain point, but they eventually diverge. And as a consumer, as a home seller, as a home buyer, it's not clear to me how these black box design choices are made behind the scenes. So I might think of platforms as trying to do their best in maximizing accuracy, but what's happening is the platform is actually trying to maximize its advertising revenue, which we claim in this work is that platforms with this incentive to maximize advertising revenue will set the model to an overfitted setting. So in machine learning parlance, we have the idea of underfitting and overfitting, which essentially lead to excess fluctuations in prices. So whatever is the real ground truth prices for homes in the market, the platform will instead create prices that will have some excess fluctuations on them. So if you think about both those claims that I made, one from the feedback loop and one from the platform profit incentives, in a way, both are talking about more erratic, more fluctuating or high variance, low bias prices. And these sort of prices in the housing market in general tend to increase the volume of housing market transactions. This naturally benefits the platforms that earn from advertising or commission revenue. Think of Uber, think of Amazon, all of them benefit if you transact more. This also benefits large, risk-neutral real estate investors. Any investor that is risk-neutral is okay with erratic prices on both directions, because that kind of cancels out for them. and they are doing hundreds of thousands of transactions on any given year. But this makes risk-averse small buyers and sellers worse off. And that's the biggest peril of AI. AI, which is sort of this promise that it's going to level the playing field, it's going to inform everyone about search and pricing. What ends up happening is the small risk-averse buyer and seller might be worse off in the introduction of AI. The policymaker, there are two, two actions that could be taken. One is on the monitoring and detection of these feedback and excess fluctuations in housing market prices. And this is very challenging because unlike a lot of other domains where a ground truth is visible, there is no ground truth in the housing market. If a home price is influenced by AI, I don't have a control group of homes where I can look at what would have happened without AI. So that the influence is so widespread. So there has to be methods that have to develop to detect this feedback and excess fluctuations. I think a lot of it, some of it already exists. It's a question of applying these methods to the housing market. The second bit that we suggest strongly in this work is that regulators should look at enforcing model controls on platforms that offer these AI-based prices. And this idea is similar in spirit to model controls that were instituted on financial asset pricing models after the 2007-2008 financial crisis. So when you think of erratic, high variance prices, there hasn't been a housing market crisis that's been caused by these prices just yet, right? So we shouldn't wait for the maybe 5 or 10 years down the line where there's a huge housing market crisis because of these prices. Before that happens, hopefully regulators, policymakers can step in to institute model controls on platforms that are offering this AI-based pricing that are so popular, widespread, prominent in the marketplace. And whatever I've spoken about today, I've spoken about in the context of the US housing market and this one platform, Zillow, that's offering AI. But this applies more broadly. So some of the places where this applies is used car markets are again very similar, where individuals buy and sell and a commodity that's very hard to price, very hard to search. Short-term rentals, peer-to-peer loans or peer-to-peer crowdfunding. An interesting use case is also art market. Again, tends to be very hard to price and very hard to search. So in all of these cases, you can expect introduction of AI to make prices more erratic, high variance, which would help the platform, which would help commission revenues, which would help large risk neutral players, but might be worse off for the small players. With that, let me stop there.
Very nice. Thank you. Yeah. Actually, there will be a lot of discussions because listeners, I'm sure, are very excited because these two speakers have given very different perspectives. One on the human psychology base, the other is looking at the broad market conditions and influence, taking it to the policy aspect as well.
Yeah, no, Nikhil, this is excellent presentation. In fact, talking about misalignment of platform and user objectives, let me just add, if I may, an example which is both similar but also kind of funny. An interview was being held of the CEO of OkCupid, the dating platform, and who has, I think, he has like a master's degree from MIT, so kind of a qualified mathematician. And the question was asked that, okay, after a whole lot of discussion, well, the end question was, okay, so any final thoughts about, do you think your platform is doing any social good? He said, well, one of the things I have to admit that our incentives and that of our users are misaligned. And they said, well, what do you mean misaligned? He said, well, look, our hopefully optimization in people's dating life is to find the perfect one for them. Our incentives are that if they actually do, they will churn out of the system. So therefore, our objective is they should always believe that they will find the perfect partner in life, but never actually do. So, anyways.
Yes, considering that you have such a interesting background, you're an industry guy and you have been in that field for many, many years. So may I ask you, Professor Jaideep, the first question about you drawing from your industry experience, both in the field of analytics and field of data science. What type of proactive measures do you think an organization should implement in order to detect and mitigate some of the bias which was taken up by Professor Nikhil in particular, and especially in the domain where algorithmic decisions impact, like you gave that example, very critical aspects of society. Both, of course, you took that very interesting example, but also healthcare and finance and so on. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Well, I hope there's no other presentations left that I'm in kind of
No,
interjected
you go
myself
ahead.
in.
Yes.
Okay. So, well, first of all, thank you both of you for excellent presentations. So of course, you ask a broad question, but let me at least, so that I'll talk about a few elements. So let's actually start with, Professor Malik's presentation. He talked about this misalignment, right? So clearly, in this case, and he also pointed out that price of a house is inherently, there's no ground truth. As the real estate industry always tells you, that price of a house is exactly what someone is willing to pay for it, right? That's it. And that's why all your real estate agents will advise you, don't fall in love with a house. In fact, another misaligned thing was that the fact that the seller is the one who pays both sides commission. So the buyer's agent is actually on the seller's side. That's another thing, So there are all these sort of misaligned incentives all over the place. I think that in that case, one of the points is that maybe a Zillow kind of a service should be offered by the government so that there's no profit objective. So if there was a government, we talked about regulators, but maybe the pricing itself should be set by the government. There should be some platform that the government has for setting the prices, in which case, they already do taxation, right? I mean, property taxes and so on. So they have some expertise and there's enough economy. So maybe that if that is the pricing that is set, or at least if not the pricing, then maybe, the appropriate how these algorithms are making. So at least it should be open. So I think what we need is openness of the algorithms for doing all of this stuff. That is what will lead to it. So that's one side. The second, maybe if that is not possible, then the other thing can be that, again, another very ill-defined term is, let's say, credit score of a person, okay? We don't rely on just one company to give the credit score. If I apply for a loan, my bank will go and ask at least 3-4 different credit agencies. So relying on just one company is a danger. Like as Professor Malik showed, the misaligned incentives, and therefore, so I think that is one of the big things that we have to be able to do. On the other hand, it has solved a problem. That is, it at least gives every seller or buyer one data point, or at least one price around which they can negotiate. Now, at least they know what, like otherwise, someone says, the Zillow says this home is worth $850,000. Okay, fine. At least I know what the ballpark is. Before that, I had no idea. Of course, it's also created all kinds of funny things like now you can, this is what I call, peeking into the neighborhood's living room. Now you can drive around a neighborhood and say, oh, how much is this price home worth? A favorite activity of my wife and I when we are driving around in neighborhoods. So that is a good entertainment that it offers. That's another social value. Now, about the other healthcare kind of things. So I think my point over here is 2 points I made. One is that maybe some stronger government oversight in how these models are. They need to be a little bit more open, especially because they are, I mean, like, again, think about health insurance rates. as a sort of cue into the other one. There is a, in health insurance, there's private health insurance in the US, but increasingly 40% of all health insurance in the US is through Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the government, right? And what prices they are offering is the one that is finally driving. In fact, there was recently an article by one of the CEOs, I think of the CEO of Penn Medical, as a matter of fact, in Becker's IT something, that said that one of the big things that is going to happen is in the next 10 years, right now it is 40% by the government health, single payer, and 60% on the other side, private. He said in 10 years, expected to flip 60% single government health, and largely due to this Obamacare kind of stuff, right? And 40% the other way. And when that happens, then that single payer pricing is going to drive everything. Now, given the fact that healthcare every year, the US government spends about 20% more than the GDP of India, it's about 4.3 trillion at this point, right? 4.4 trillion is the entire healthcare expense per year in the US. These are large numbers, and therefore those kind of factors are going to have importance. So again, the having models are a little bit open to scrutiny, and looking at multiple independent organizations and then triaging with that is something that is going to be very important.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. If I may ask the same question to Dr. Nikhil. He talked about the 2 points. I think one of the points, the governmental oversight, you did mention in your policy prescription. But keeping these algorithms open, which Professor Jaideep was referring to, because that becomes quite debatable in that sense that that is the IP of the whole product. Yeah. So how does one address that?
I think there are a couple of very real challenges. Like, let me share a couple of anecdotes on this. I think when I think of similar scenarios, I think I always go back to 2007, 2008 housing market crisis, where we technically did have regulators who were supposed to audit these quantitative, they were not AI models, but they were quantitative models of asset risk pricing. It's almost that the regulators were in awe of the kind of complexity and sophistications that these hedge funds and banks could pull off. So the auditor was kind of in awe of the complexity of the firms. The same thing's happening again here. Ideally, the county officials, the administrators should have an independent way of pricing houses for tax appraisals, right? But we have lawsuits in the US where they have found that some county officials actually sit in their office, they open up Zillow, they look at how the prices are changing on Zillow, and they decide to go to homes to do tax appraisals based on Zillow prices. They're not supposed to do that. But once an algorithm becomes so sophisticated and prevalent and so easy to use, I don't know, this realistically, do the regulators have enough spending power to be able to outspend the platform or the firm in the sophisticated algorithm? A little bit tricky. I think the idea of opening up the model for audit and just publicly is a very interesting one, especially because we have at least 2 to 3 players in the US right now who are trying to attract consumers onto their platforms based on the accuracy of their AI. Zillow is one, Redfin's another one, Open Doors, and a few others kind of trying to get to the 3rd spot. So with AI, with these platforms sort of claiming that my accuracy of my AI algorithm is what is my business core competence, it's going to be hard to argue that they be forced to open up these platforms just for competitive reasons. I do have other work that looks at explainability of these AI predictions. So could there be a balance in the sense of, okay, you don't open up the model, but you are forced to provide interpretable AI explanations next to your prediction. But that's a route that could be taken where the platforms aren't forced to entirely explain their prediction, but at least regulated to at least partially explain their predictions.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
that sort of answers the question.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, if I may just ask you a follow-up. You did talk about the governmental uh, inverted commas interventions, or what they can probably do, policy people. But taking what Professor Jaideep was talking about, can government offer an alternative which is more sort of open source, because they are not commercially involved, and therefore then the private players will be forced to give not such a high degree of variance. But even um, the other competitors of Xylo, what would their pricing? Will a consumer look at A, B, C, and also this governmental platform and then take a call? Is that a possible solution?
I at the very least, I hope that we have a situation where there are at least always 2 or 3 independent platforms. So I think that's hopefully that happens. The government creating its own highly sophisticated AI algorithm that competes or even is preferred over these platforms, I feel that's tricky. I mean, to that point, I would say, maybe the government should have its own search engine that beats the one that Google has. The government should have its own recommendation system that beats the one that Amazon has. I think realistically, for policymakers to create enough awareness that as a population, we want to fund multi-billion-dollar projects creating sort of like venture capital investment into the government creating such big AI, I find I think that might be challenging to pull off.
Right, right. Thank you. Dr. Sharath, towards the end of your initial presentation, you did refer to the privacy and autonomy autonomy aspect about especially medical health or mental health especially. So based on your research on all this use of AI technologies, how can these technologies be sort of ethically integrated to address these mental health disparities, so to speak, and also promote interventions without disturbing or upholding the principles of the patient's privacy and autonomy?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Actually, it's also an incredibly challenging problem, as you might imagine. For instance, a lot of us, when we use apps, we don't really know how much information or personal information we are actually giving out, right? And what kinds of insights or what kinds of outcomes these apps can predict just looking at our usage data. So number one, I think informed consent is very much required, and it shouldn't be like the terms of service that we usually just scroll down and then click accept. But it has to be sort of communicated in a very plain, simple language. That's one. So how well can we inform the consumers, right? Number two, there are also multiple stakeholders involved, right? So we often think of AI-driven mental health care as a tired triaging system. So AI cannot do the diagnostics, right? So it's not there yet. We definitely need the clinicians, but at the same time, AI could close the gap between how many people need treatment and how many people are actually being treated, right? So for instance, let's say we found that around 95% of folks in India need mental health treatment, but they're not, rather, the treatment gap is 95%. AI could potentially play a role in recommending or giving a sort of a risk for individuals, who can then follow up with clinicians or their primary care provider. But at the same time, there's the other challenge of can this AI be open sourced, right?
Yeah.
The immediate answer is no. Because what if an AI that can predict depression gets into the hands of, let's say, insurance companies, or gets into the hands of companies, right? Because we have other work that showed that you can forecast a depression diagnosis almost 6 months in advance, right? Now, think of an insurance company who can do that. You will start seeing, increased premiums before anything actually happens. A company could basically fire employees thinking, oh, they will be unproductive in the future when there is no hard evidence, right? So it's actually a really challenging situation, but at the same time, the way at least we are thinking of this is having a really good collaboration with clinicians and getting buy-in from both clinicians and patients, and sort of AI being that it's more of AI in the loop than human in the loop, right? So we don't want AI to solve the problem, but we want people to solve the problem, and AI is sort of helping clinicians to solve the problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah. In fact, when you are mentioning about the health aspect, which is a very good analogy that you gave, I am reminded of, I think it was a Hollywood movie, which talks about preventing crime and looking at the behavior of a person.
Minority Report, starring Tom
Minority
Cruise.
Report.
Yeah, they introduced the word pre-crime.
Yeah, exactly. So these things are, I think, a beginning. I mean, with AI, I think all this is becoming much more possible or feasible. So the ethical part of it is, I don't know exactly how Minority Report ends, but I don't know whether we should go that way at all or not. So that was one thing. What do you think, Professor Jaideep?
Well, of course, Minority Report, it's a good movie to watch anyways, for anyone interested in tech and ethics. But actually that poses the interesting question of, clearly preventing crime before happening is a good thing. But then according to any legal system, thinking about a crime is not a crime.
Correct.
A crime happens. So, it's like, because if that happened, then so many spouses would get arrested all the time, right? For thinking of violence against their spouse or angry thoughts. So I mean, that would lead to a lot of, and family members. We already saw that.
Yeah.
So I think that given that legal standard, just, guilty, innocent till proven guilty. Similarly, so there are some bright lines that exist because of which something like pre-crime doesn't make sense, at least in the current legal system. Yeah. But let me actually come to a theoretical ethical question that has become real already. Pre-crime is too far, but think about self-driving cars, right? The question is that if a self-driving, all those economics trolley problems have suddenly become real. They're not hypothetical anymore, in the sense that if I'm driving in my Tesla, or pick your favorite, self-driving car. Yeah. The question is that, let us say it gets into a situation where that has to either kill someone on the road or kill me, right? Those are only two choices. And now if product safety guides that it should save me, it should not try to kill me, right? Otherwise, product safety issue versus, then killing someone else. So the question is, how do you, these problems suddenly become real. And obviously, just like those trolley problems, there are no clear-cut answers. Right. Even the economists study those problems, those are not really problems in economics, they're all problems in ethics, which never have a clear-cut answer. So these problems, I guess the question is that all of these technologies that are coming in, we talked about, Nikhil gave excellent examples of misaligned incentives, which really means that, the for-profit corporations, their main objective, and they can even justify that, saying, hey, the reason we exist is for our shareholders. And shareholder benefit comes only when we make more profits, right? So their incentives are mostly aligned towards that. And that's why it is not towards those who are actually spending the money buying and selling homes, right?
Yes, yes.
So therefore, there needs to be, that's why those are the kind of domains where I think some serious government oversight is very important. Healthcare ones, of course, are very challenging. I mean, Sharat gave the examples of all the, pre-guilt, if you will. Someone project that they're going to be either non-productive or whatever else, and then take actions based on that. Those are all dangerous things. Yeah. And of course, with nowadays, especially, no one explicitly mentioned LLMs, but our dependence on large language models and generative AI is becoming so high that problems of hallucination. I mean, it has already happened. Look, with things like web search, basically, whatever Google or Bing, whichever your favorite search engine is, shows you, first of all, if it doesn't show you something, then it doesn't really exist. It may exist, but if they don't index you, then it doesn't exist. So there's that problem. But then the other side, of course, is that whatever biases are being introduced by many of these things, we just are living with those biases. Fortunately, not something as bad has happened with generative AI and its hallucination problem, which, by the way, we have no clue how to solve. People are trying, but we don't even have any clue. I mean, we don't really have good clues as to how generative AI systems actually generate their answers. Before we understand that mechanism, how it causes hallucination. So there are all these AI is going to has, the perils part list is, I mean, promise is clear, and it can actually be measured by the stock price of NVIDIA as to how much success AI has had, if that by one measure. But the perils part of it is the list is long, and in general, the industry will not talk about it as much because it doesn't have benefits. It only makes people fearful. So in generally, it is kept, the media will, or at least the business media will not talk about it.
In fact, that is the reason we have academics, not the business people. So you should be able to give a more, I would say, balanced perspective on this whole thing.
Professor, let me add quickly on that, on the points that Professor Jaideep mentioned. I think maybe I've started the bashing of the big companies that have too much control. I think it's worth pointing out that in some of these cases, it's not necessarily that these platforms are designing AI to explicitly help their profit and hurt the consumer. I think a lot of the signals that they rely on as to calculate the accuracy of their algorithms are sort of the immediate signals, right? So for Google, it's do you click on my search result or not? For Amazon, do you click on my recommendation or not? For Zillow, it's how much are you willing to bid for an ad on my website? These kind of signals are just a lot more high frequency, right? So they can't really train their models on a consumer surplus that might be realized 3 years down the line. And so a part of the problem is not that the firms have no moral or ethical responsibility at all. It's just that signals that capture the consumer or social surplus just happen way down the line. And whether you click on my ad, how much you bid on my ad, do you click, do you convert, do you buy? Those signals are just a lot more high frequency. It's easier to train your models on those signals quickly and update your models. So that I think that's one part of the problem for sure. And in terms of the solution to all of this, and you pointed out that academics maybe have something to do about this. So something that I've noticed is in some ways, a lot of the computer science community might be really LLMs, we don't understand them, but a lot of experts will have a lot of strong instinct about what AI models will do, but maybe not as strong an instinct about how consumers behave or how consumers respond to an AI output. If you look at economists spend their lifetime modeling consumer behavior, but they see AI as a black box. So I feel like there has to be more by academics, which kind of opens up both of these things together to be able to kind of clearly lay out, okay, exactly how is AI's decision going to change the consumer's action. I need to take that into account when I'm developing this AI model. So maybe more of that can help us out.
Right. But
Yes.
to some extent, Professor Sharath did talk about the language, whether it is predictive or whether it can lead to the language used in the social media, negative versus positive, is a prediction of the mental health and so on. So, but I think the couple of points or warnings or that he gave was that you need to see more the research itself or the data itself must be more segmented to not just the big picture what applies to the white Americans may not be applicable to the black, and within India we have our own stratification of data. So to this question to Dr. Sharath, to what extent this stratification needs to be done? I mean, where does the majority end and where does the rest of it start? What do you think about? What is your recommendation on that?
This is a good question, and I don't know if I have a recommendation as such, but just to talk about unintended consequences, right? So both Jaideep and Nikhil talked about how often organizations don't start out with a bad motive, right? Sure, they want to profit their shareholders, but at the same time, the motive itself is not to harm people, but often I think there was this case of Microsoft releasing a chatbot a few years back, and which was I think on Twitter, and then the chatbot was basically learning off of other people's data, and within I think a day it became so racist that Microsoft had to take it down, right? So often the data on which these models are trained, it's not the best, and it can potentially cause unintended consequences. And there's this question of how much precision you want versus how much generalizability you want, right? So there's an age-old machine learning challenge, and I think even in medicine, there's this idea of precision medicine, meet every person where they are. At the same time, you want therapeutics that or therapies that work for folks at large, right? So there's this trade-off, and it's really hard as a computer scientist to make that decision, right? So I think it really has to be a collaboration with clinicians and folks with domain expertise, and not just domain as medicine broadly, but also specific cultures. So for example, if I'm working in the Indian context, I would have to work with clinicians in India who are seeing patients in India. Just because I had my education in India doesn't mean anything, because I just learned computer science. Now I can't just claim to have expertise in Indian culture, right? So it's a multidisciplinary endeavor on where those trade-offs between precision versus generalizability can be set on. But broadly, I think you want AI to be as generalizable as possible, while also having the second tier where you account for individual differences, if that makes sense.
Right. Thank you. I think it has been a wonderful experience for all of us. I'm sure these participants in this webinar have benefited greatly from these very different, very frank, and very open discussion on many of these. Basically, as you have been saying, the advantages of AI are very clear. The disadvantages or the perils we are still discovering it, and prescriptions for that are very difficult to find. And maybe computer scientists are not the right people. So it has to be a cohesive set of people, including policymakers, should come together to think of the best that can. So on behalf of MIJSC and CS ITM at IIM Bangalore. I extend a very heartfelt gratitude to all our panelists, um, Dr. Sharath, Dr. Nikhil, Dr. Jaideep, and in absentia, Dr. Vishal, for the insights that they have brought in about this promises and perils issue. And of course, this is only the beginning. We will continue this dialogue, I'm sure, in another forum. Your broad expertise in these areas and broad perspectives that you have shared with us are very crucial to understand the AI's impact, both positive and negative. And I hope that these discussions will be the starting point to explore what the policy people have to do, what industry must do itself, and what the Aam Aadmi, as we say here, what the common man needs to be aware of in order to be not taken in by these claims. To all our participants, thank you for joining us on this very engaging webinar, and let us continue to explore and discuss these important topics which foster innovation and are responsible for the developments in the field of fields like AI. Thank you once again for being part of this wonderful discussion. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Professor Srivastav, you are saying something here. You have raised him.
Yes, I would like to add sort of one overall sort of thought on this. Exactly in line with what you said, that clearly there is, AI is going to benefit us in many, many different ways going forward, and the whole society, individuals, organizations, corporations, and societies, and the society. And I think that benefit usually is easy to see, and therefore organizations will move forward, especially in the private sector, because people pay for benefits, and therefore whenever there are benefits, money is to be made and organizations will move forward. So there's an incentive. But at the same time, the more and more this technology impacts society, the more and more perils also it raises. And that's the one that there needs to be some mechanism that needs to be there, what is often called the guardrails or whatever else there needs to be. The other part is that, as has been pointed out, and as we all know, these models, AI models, are going to become ever more sophisticated. We are already in a position that with so much of social media, for example, we have an information glut. And what has it done? It has not leveled the playing field, for the simple reason that we are so overwhelmed by information that all we do is everyone goes back to their comfort zone. That is why we see so much of polarization and fragmentation of thought. I'm not even going to say politics, this, that, whatever, right? When it's the political season, it's politics. When it is sports season, it is sports team, whatever it is. The point is, with so much information, it is so overwhelming that we just turn away. And we say, you know what? I want to be in an echo chamber. So a glut of information led to echo chamber. And trying to even imagine that we will have to understand AI for the average person, this is never going to happen. So AI will rule our lives. We won't even understand who is ruling our lives. And that means that the role of whoever is responsible for the guardrails of the society must play a more active role. To Nikhil's example, that the county guy doesn't know how to price a house. Well, get better county people. Like I know that in the taxation, for instance, I've worked a lot with our Department of Revenue as well as Treasury in the US. The state revenue people don't understand much, but the federal Treasury people are very, very smart. In fact, I've also worked with the GST folks in India. They understand things really well. In fact, GST folks are using nowadays graph mining and machine learning in a big way, right? We're using Aadhaar and stuff like that. So there are people who have the expertise. If not, nations need to build that expertise. Okay. And the last point I want to make is, the point that you said, that computers was made earlier by, I think, by Sharath as well as Nikhil, that computer scientists and economists maybe need to talk. Actually, whenever any technology starts impacting society, the policy making, of course, has to be led by the policy makers, but also at the table, there needs to be everyone. They need to be the technologists, they need to be the risk people, they need to be the ethicists, whoever. In the policy formulation, it cannot be the case that just someone who has the power but not the knowledge will make policies, because they will then be either be well-intentioned, misguided policies, or could be ill-intentioned, whatever it is. But the point is that at that table, there has to be everyone, all those who have the expertise that collectively can bring this, and that is a social responsibility. That's a responsibility that the administrators, those who have the power in any society, need to. That is a responsibility, because they are the keepers of the social contract with the citizens. So this is something, again, I'm speaking very strongly on this, because after having spent, Shiva mentioned, I finished my PhD in 1988, and I have worked across the various aspects of the spectrum, academia, industry, internationally, and so on. But this is a strongly held opinion of mine that it's extremely important. All the people have to be at the table, and this issue has to be taken seriously. Otherwise, I don't have as many years left, but there are many people here who have more years in life and will be affected. So just think, as a last statements from an old timer here.
You look very young. Don't worry. Just a point. I think what rightly you said that we have to bring in people who understand technology, but also I think the point made was that government should put its where its mouth is, it should be put its foot as well, or the purse. And I think invest in resources, money. I mean, invest in terms of bringing in such abilities, not just the human, but also the technological abilities to support a counter to the private. I think that is what you have been advocating, and I think you have made a very strong case for that. Thank you. And I think many of these points that has come up during this webinar, we will be, of course, summarizing it and sharing it with the policymakers in India as well. So I appreciate your thoughtful remarks on this. There have been a lot of questions asked here, and we will be sharing, if with your permission, we will be sharing your email IDs with the participants if they want to connect with you on any one particular question that they have to understand a little more in depth. Oh, thank you. Appreciate very much. And looking forward to meeting you in person sometime when you come to Namma Uru Bengaluru, or as they say, the garden city. It used to be a garden city. Yeah. Please do come and visit us at IIM. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sari.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for organizing this.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.